try and start on time. This is unusual. To actually have a chair where Mr. Montalvo, like, where is he?
I can go stand in the middle if that's
Good. Okay, well, I do want to open the meeting up, call it to order, and I'm sure others will drift in as we go along, but we'll welcome everybody, and I think we do introductions, okay? Secretary Gwynn?
Hi, Secretary David Gwynn, FDOT.
Good morning, Brad Miller. Welcome to PSTA. I'm with PSTA.
I'm Charles Kluge with Port Tampa Bay representing Hillsborough MPO.
Pat Kemp, Hillsborough County Commissioner, Countywide MPO, TMA, TMA.
Good morning, Beth Alden, Staff Director of Hillsborough MPO.
County Commissioner Steve Merriman.
Pinellas County Commissioner Dave Eggers.
Good morning, I'm Whit Blanton, Executive Director of Fort Pinellas.
Good morning, Doreen Cardell, City and Criminal Counsel for Pinellas.
Good morning, I'm Janet Long, Pinellas County Commissioner, and I serve on a lot of different boards, but I'm chair of PSTA this year, and I would like to encourage everyone to welcome to PSTA, I guess I should say that, but I would like to encourage everyone to speak up a bit because the audio in this room isn't that great, number one, and number two, it is being streamed, isn't it, Brad?
Yeah.
Yeah. So speak up so everyone can hear you. That would be great. Thank you.
No, it's not. It's not being
We're not being streamed.
Oh, we're not? I saw the light, so I assumed.
So permission to speak freely now.
There you go.
There you go.
I'm John Miller from the Pasco MPO.
Sean Sullivan from the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. Morning.
Okay. And sir, would you like to?
Oh, hi everybody. I'm David Green, Executive Director of T-BAR.
And you are new.
I am new.
Welcome.
The newest.
Welcome to the area.
Thank you.
Great to have you on board. Okay, we'll start over here and go around the room.
Chelsea Fabra for Pinellas.
Lori Lehman for Pinellas.
Michael Case, T-BARDA. Omar Pirzada, T-BARDA.
Bill Johnson, T-BARDA CAC.
RG Myers,
John Tewksbury, Beach Strand Clearwater.
Tom Whalen, City of St. Petersburg.
Ali Al-Tefi, Pasco MPO.
Manny Latcherini, Pasco MPO staff.
Rob Kersey, Kendall Oliver.
Laura Lawson, Commissioner Kemp's office.
Diane Sauls at the request of Hillsborough County Planning Commission.
Sarah McKinley, Hillsborough MPO.
Roger Johnson, City Clearwater.
Lisa Silva, Hillsborough MPO.
Jim Meyer, AECOM.
Cindy Raskin-Schmidt, PSTA.
Scott Pringle, WSP.
Braden Davis, AECOM.
Dave Sobush, Tampa Bay Partnership.
Michael Marino, West Shore Alliance.
Stephen Benson, FDOT.
Richard Moss, FDOT.
Ed McKinney, FDOT.
Roger Roscoe, FDOT.
Tom Nucera, St. Pete Tampa Aerial Transit.
Steve Henley, Beach Strand Clearwater.
And Brad, if I may, just to inform everyone, Doyle tells me that we are being streamed and that they can't hear. So again, please speak up.
Okay. Thank you all. Welcome everybody in the room. Glad you could come. Our meeting objectives today are three things. We're going to discuss leadership or refinements to leadership group structure. We're going to review the results of its time Tampa Bay survey. And we're also going to review and provide comment on the strategic intermodal system cost feasible plan. It's a lot of words. Okay, so, and I think you'll see attached to the cover page with our agenda the summary of our last meeting, September 7th, 2018. So I will now, actually we're ahead of schedule, which is good, turn it over to the MPO staff directors to discuss the restructuring options for the TMA leadership.
Before we do that, we should.
Oh, public comment. Yes, I'm sorry. We do have two public comment. Michael Marino. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. I just wanted to mention, as the commissioner mentioned, you'll take a look at the 2045 plan later on today. And I just, on behalf of the West Shore Alliance, want to encourage the committee to look at advancing the West Shore interchange back into the 2045, back into the last 5-year plan as opposed to where it is currently in the 2045 plan. at the earliest to be programmed for 2028. Obviously, that'd be another decade that we have congestion. What's going on right now, as you may know, is that the traffic funneling, especially from the north and west, gets into that bottleneck at the interchange at West Shore, and the interchange is not getting any bigger currently. The other thing to add about the West Shore interchange, which you may not know if you're not in the district as much, but the interchange, when it's rebuilt, will restore 3 roads in the district and reconnect parts of that neighborhood that have been disconnected since the interstate was built originally. And so for West Shore, this isn't just a need for regional access and regional connections for commuters, it is also the local interaction that's necessary. West Shore has a lot of congestion right now, especially West Shore Boulevard. West Shore Boulevard, as is going on right now in Hillsborough County, is meant to be a complete street. It can't become a complete street with the amount of traffic that's on it right now. The way you reduce the traffic on West Shore Boulevard is by reconnecting Trash, Occident, and Rio streets, which would be done when the interchange is rebuilt. So for the West Shore Alliance and the businesses and the residents in the West Shore area, there's that need not just for the interchange to be redone and have this regional priority finally fixed, but also to allow the West Shore District to advance further as a live, work, and play neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Tom Nosura.
Good morning, fellow leaders. First of all, I need to welcome David from the public, be among the first again to welcome you to this distinguished group. I want to follow up a little bit on what was discussed, and I know we're going to get into that conversation later with regard to the content, which I thought was very important towards the end of the meeting last time, and that was getting around the purpose and whether or not maybe the purpose of this group needs to be refocused a bit for our needs in 2018 and 2019 in the future compared to what it was when the group was formulated. One of the key words in this group, or the most important word in this title of this group, is leadership. One of the most important roles of a leader, as I see it, is as a facilitator. Yet we all are here championing our own organizations, and it's kind of trying to find that balance between being a facilitator and being the champion of the organization that we have to work out. I want to just add one thought along that line, and that was the change in the name of T-BARTA to go from transportation to transit. I think that was a huge change, and it focused that group tightly on an area. If you take a look at transportation today, that is car-centric. There's no denying that cars are our #1 form of transportation. So if that's, if you're going to be transportation, then you have to be car-centric. I mean, that's just the way it works out. Yet, the future has to be about transit. The last thing I wanted to mention is that our vendor SkyTran last month sold a 12.7% stake in the company to a large conglomerate in India, which not only provided SkyTran with tens of millions of dollars for commercialization, but it also gave a company in India the rights to run with it, to develop their system in India where it is needed 10 times worse than it is here in the Tampa Bay area. We're excited about that opportunity to see rapid development, even though it'll be overseas. There are some other things that are going on with SkyTran that I'm not privy to discuss today, but I hope to be able to follow up at our next meeting with a more detailed report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I will turn it over to staff.
Okay, I'll take this one. Thank you. Good morning again, everybody. I'm Whit Blanton, and I think I can manipulate this from out here. Yeah. So you may remember that at our last meeting, we decided to move away from having a hired facilitator for each one of these meetings and to have a rotating chair. So that happened at the very end of the meeting, and we really didn't have a lot of time to discuss the implications of that. But the MPO staff directors and others who are part of the TMA leadership group support team have been discussing those in the interim. And this presentation is really meant to start a conversation and to get some feedback on how we want to operate in 2019. And just again, a little bit of backdrop, you all are aware that there is the MPO Coordination Best Practices Study, which is wrapping up. We had our third workshop and final workshop this past Monday, and the team for that project is developing some recommendations and a single recommendation that we will receive by the end of the year. And then each of the MPOs are going to have some workshops and dialogue in the beginning of January to address that recommendation, of the draft recommendation. So that's a little bit of backdrop. And so what we're really talking about is, regardless of what happens with the best practices recommendation, it's going to take some time for that recommendation to take hold, and this is really something we're looking for the next year. And just some context, and I want to direct you back to your packet, because we have the purpose statement in your packet, and this is just a summary of it, but I think it's instructive to go back and look at what this organization was created to do. This is a TMA-focused discussion forum, and the TMA is the urbanized area for Pasco, Pinellas, and Hillsborough, the transportation management area. And it's not really a discussion forum that's covered exactly by any other organization. So that's why this group was formed. And its purpose is to develop regional consensus priorities for the urbanized area, for the TMA, including the allocation of federal and state funds. And every year we've adopted a set of transportation priorities for that 3-county region. And it's a focus on major cross-county transportation markets and traffic movements. So that's why we're here, is to talk about those inter-county travel options. And then to help the metropolitan area speak with one voice. Our membership is comprised of 3 members from each MPO board as voting members. And that's always been a little bit of gray area as we've operated over the last 4 years, but that's clear in our purpose statement. And then we have non-voting advisors. So I'm going to walk you through in this presentation how we think about not only our membership and our non-voting advisors, but how we may vote in the future. And then we have the staff of those agencies meets as a support group. And our staff also is broader. It includes other partners as well, such as the Tampa Bay Partnership and others. The organization is that we act as an advisory body to the MPOs. So we make recommendations, and then each of the MPOs then adopts those recommendations. And then the MPOs ultimately have final approval of any of the TMA work products, including the regional priorities. So the goals for this conversation, and ultimately for the TMA in terms of the outcomes, is we would like a clear list of specific regional priority projects for funding. And you may recall that over the last year or two, what once was a very specific set of transportation projects has gotten a little broader to be things like outcomes from the regional transit feasibility plan. And we would like to maybe tighten that up a little bit in the coming year. Looking at joint inter-county transportation initiatives, not necessarily a project, but things we want to work on together. Could be policy, could be demographic analysis, could be research, it could be some other kind of initiative. Monitoring of the regional transportation system to achieve targets. You all probably are aware that we are now under a federal mandate to develop performance targets at the state level and at the urbanized area MPO level, and then demonstrate how we're achieving those targets with our transportation work programs. And then certainly we want to use this forum to build better relationships across the region. So with that set of goals in mind, first of all, any questions about these goals? Does that make sense to everybody? Am I missing anything?
You're doing
Okay,
good so
we'll
far.
keep going. And please feel free to interrupt me as I go along. So again, a little context. In 2014, we hired Rafael Montalvo as our facilitator, and his contract ended at the end of the September meeting. So this is kind of the first, we're figuring it out. And we now have a rotating chair, so we need to figure out how that process will work, but each meeting will have a new chair to run the meeting. And the MPO staff will prepare and handle the agenda items, kind of like we've always done. And we've added a new wrinkle that at the end of this meeting and every meeting, just to sort of balance and make sure we get a perspective, each of the MPOs will have an opportunity, and advisors as well, to give some updates on matters of regional concern, just to make sure every voice is heard. But we deferred a decision on how to vote, and I think with a chair now, rather than a facilitator, we're going to need to take some votes. That's just probably what's going to have to happen. And coming up this year are two critical things that this group will need to address. One is the recommendations for the regional long-range transportation plan that we're developing as part of our individual long-range plans, and that'll be somewhere around the time of September of this year, and that'll be a recommendation back to the individual MPOs. And we can talk more about that in the coming months as we get more into that, but the MetroQuest survey, the It's Time Tampa Bay, is laying the groundwork for that. And then more near term, around May, we will need to develop our regional transportation priorities again. So that's probably our next first real opportunity to take a vote. And our hope is that we won't have to take votes, that there will be broad consensus and widespread agreement among the three MPOs about what our recommendations are. So that would be our first option, is there general agreement. But we do need to clarify how voting will occur, when voting will occur, and by whom, how that will take place. And then consider, should we, as we formalize this process a little bit more, go beyond the one-pager purpose statement that we've developed and create maybe a little more tight set of bylaws for this organization. And again, it may be an interim structure pending the outcomes of that MPO regional coordination study, or we could be setting the stage for strengthening this TMA in the longer term. So option A, that we presented a little bit at the last meeting, but I don't think really got too far with this, was essentially having one MPO, one vote. So you've got three MPOs represented, 3 members from each of those 3 MPOs, and each members vote individually, but it would result in a single vote for the MPO for any recommendation that goes back to the individual MPOs. So you would keep the TMA membership under this scenario at 3 per MPO, which is not based on population, but is we're all coming to the table as equals. The quorum would be 5 members with at least 1 from each MPO. If only 2 members are present for an MPO and they have a split vote, then they either try to reach agreement at the meeting or they have to bring it back to the MPO and get direction, and then we defer that item to a future meeting. Are we okay with option A? Does everybody understand that option? Okay, I'm seeing nodding of heads. We can always come back.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
The 3 members per MPO are 3 board members of the MPO?
There are 3 board members from each MPO, and currently they can be elected or non-elected, and each MPO has an option for how they handle alternates. So for instance, today we have Commissioner Eggers and Vice Mayor Caudell as our official representatives, but we've changed our rules so that Commissioner Janet Long can serve as a voting member of this body today because we don't have our 3rd person. Clear? Okay, option B is a proportionate representation of the TMA leadership group, where essentially the TMA leadership group would function as a standing committee for all 3 MPOs, and voting would be based on population in each county. And so according to the current population of the 3 MPOs, and in fairness, that would result in Hillsborough with 5 members, Pinellas with 3, and Pasco actually might even be 1 member, but we don't think that's appropriate. We think they ought to come with 2 members, so we would set that as 2 members. That would mean quorum would be 6 members from all the MPOs, and it would be a straight up or down vote by who is present. So if you had 6 members there for a quorum and all 5 were from Hillsborough County and 1 was from Pinellas, you could still vote and you would have an action under that scenario. You would expand eligibility to serve to include well, here's a question, I guess, would be to have the 5 or the 3 or the 2, would it be okay to have non-elected board members at the table? And Hillsborough is the MPO that currently has the non-elected board members. I don't believe Pasco has non-elected board members, and Pinellas does not. And if the vote is tied, say 5 Hillsborough and 3 and 2 Pasco and Pinellas on the other side, then each MPO would get a vote as a tiebreaker. So then if Pasco and Pinellas were voting, that would break the tie. Is option B clear to everybody? And again, we could develop another option that's not covered here, but these were the ones that were logical to staff. Commissioner Long.
Well, I don't have a comment as much as just kind of a clarification for my own myself. If I don't understand the reasoning behind a non-elected MPO board member, because unless you are elected, you don't have any influence over the money that you bring in, do you?
Well, Beth, maybe you can answer that question better than myself. That's your board members.
Sure. So we have some board members who are appointed to serve on boards. For example, our current representative on the Heart Board is appointed, I think he's appointed by City of Tampa. And so he does participate in all of the regular votes that the Heart Board takes on matters of budget and so forth. And he participates with all of our board decisions. We also have a member of the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission, which is kind of comparable to the Pinellas Planning Council. But in our case, it's a separate group of appointed members, again, appointed by the local jurisdictions. And so they do make decisions about comprehensive plans and comprehensive plan amendments, and those that then get forwarded to the local governments. So those are our two appointed members. We also have 3 members who are agency directors. We're at that level. So we have the CEO of Port Tampa Bay, and his alternate is Charles Klug. And I forgot your current title, right?
Principal counsel.
Principal counsel. And the CEO of Hillsborough County Aviation Authority. And the executive director of the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority all serve as voting members on our board.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so that's option B. Option C is essentially a hybrid of option A and B. So you would still have the proportional representation by population, and then any motion must also win the support of 2 of the 3 MPOs. So you combine the 2. So the difference between B and C is that this only really happens if the vote is tied. Each MPO then would get a vote as a tiebreaker. But under this one, it would happen regardless. So it'd be like the House and the Senate. So you have one body or one vote that's essentially based on population, and one vote based on each MPO having a vote. So I'll keep going. We don't have to solve this right now. Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Commissioner,
I just, and I'm not sure what, but I think there are, if Hillsborough had, and I think it has to be weighted in my mind, but if Hillsborough had 5, and our MPO or our county commission has 7, I think that, and I guess that we have the city of Tampa too, so we could do all electeds and make that, and I think that would be significant and important to have it that way. In terms of the tie breaking, again, I would probably have an issue with that, because I just think if it is that controversial, then the tie should work as it does other places, and that would be a fail.
Okay.
So kind of following just regular Robert's Rules of Order on the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think the proportional representation is, I'm definitely in favor of that, as well as the quorum. I don't know about non-elected serving on the TMA. I feel kind of strongly that non-electeds probably should not be on the TMA. And then just following Robert's Rules of Order for voting, I think would be probably the best way to go. But come on, let's hear some other thoughts.
Completely agree with you, Commissioner. I
I agree.
think the option B is, with all of us that have been here from day 1, that seems to be the best product.
Except for the voting part. We're just going to follow
Right.
Robert's Rules of Order.
Right, exactly.
So if it's a tie, it's a tie.
It's a tie, and you lose.
right?
Yeah.
So you have to either make a different motion.
Thank you for that clarification.
I love it.
But I do think it's
It's a tie,
important
it's
that
not
if you get a
how it
tie,
is.
that, I mean, I think that's a message in itself, that we do have some additional work to do, so I kind of
Right.
agree. with
Yeah.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Kemp on that.
yeah, I mean, we have to work hard to gain consensus among ourselves, and I think that's important.
And I'll give you an analogy to that. As a consultant, I used to work for the Gainesville MPO, and a few years ago, they had all 5 county commissioners and all 5 city commissioners on the MTPO board. And they also had a rule that you had to have a majority of both boards for any motion to pass. And they had many a late night, they didn't start their meetings till 7 o'clock, and they had many a meeting that went past midnight because they could not get both boards to support that until 1 or 2 in the morning. I don't ever want to revisit those days, and hopefully we won't do that here, but to your point, if you have a tie and you don't have that, we can just either take another vote or we can refer it back to the MPOs and then come back at a future meeting.
Right, and yeah, because you don't want to be that one county's against another, and yeah, you don't want the tit for tat. We just gotta follow those rules and try and work on a consensus.
Okay.
Yes.
And do we have I know that we have set up right now in our MPO to have a backup plan if somebody isn't here. Do each of the counties have that, so that because I do think it's important. I mean, we're talking about if Hillsborough only has 2 members, if Hillsborough only has 2 members, I think it would be not really wise for us to move forward on a vote, with just 2 members. Or the same with Pinellas County. I don't think we're moving a consensus forward if we're taking advantage, and I don't mean intentionally, but if it just happens to work out that way. So it would be nice to know that we have backup plans, and then if we don't have a majority of them, I don't think, we can still talk and discuss, but I'm not sure that we should be voting on if we don't have a consensus of people present. If Pinellas County has 3, we only have 1 here, or you have 5 and you only have 2 here, I just think it's important that we're here, number one, but if we're not, that we don't
So,
necessarily take
do you have a
critical vote.
backup plan now?
Yeah, we do. We do
I'm
have.
here. You're
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
What's our backup plan?
We have 2 alternates. Mr. Krug is one. Commissioner
Okay,
Rivera is
for
another.
Harry Cohen.
But see, we don't have Pasco here today, so that would be, if today was a vote, we would have a
Okay,
challenge.
So then the question is, are we going to agree to let non-elected serve as our replacement?
Could they serve as an alternate, for example?
And they serve as an alternate, and I am okay with that. But comments?
Non-elected serving
As alternates.
I think I really feel strongly it should be elected. And I think we have that pool to do, and no offense. I didn't think you would be. But I just think it's important because they are accountable to the people they represent. And that's important both budget-wise and policy-wise.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Could it be that if in fact we get to that place, we could just delay the official vote until the next meeting?
I think that's probably the best.
I mean, because as Commissioner Eggers said, it clearly would indicate that we have more work to do to build that consensus. And, you know, you can't always know what your calendar is going to be when these meetings get scheduled. Lots of times there are just many conflicts.
Okay, so it says their quorum is 6 members. So what we're saying is we need to have the 5-3-2 here for every meeting.
Bingo.
We'll at least have each county have a quorum. So, you can't have 2 from Hillsborough, you need to have.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So, okay, so
Exactly.
3 would be a quorum from Hillsborough,
Right.
2 from Pinellas, and 1 from Pasco. Gotcha. So it'd be the 6. Okay, I gotcha. Just so everybody understands.
I think what we would do as staff is really work really hard to let you know that this meeting coming up is probably a likely vote. And sometimes we do run up against some deadlines. For instance, we need to transmit our priorities as this body back to the MPOs in time to meet the deadline that we need to meet for the state to get that process moving along for the work program.
Right.
And adoption of the long-range plan this year, if we, for instance, can't agree at the September meeting, it puts us at real risk in adopting the long-range plan by November, which we're federally required to do. So we would just really work very hard to impress upon you all that this is an upcoming important meeting and we need to get you there, even if we need to drive you ourselves.
The other, how this might be handled is in Hillsborough County, because since it is an issue for the other two MPOs, it could be our rule or somehow.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we have to have
Right.
at least 3 present.
But I'm just even saying with all alternatives, to have electeds. So that could be something that we could generate ourselves since the other two MPOs.
Well, we already addressed that. We're going to have electeds. Non-electeds cannot serve as alternates.
Okay.
Yeah, we already addressed that. So, okay, so I'm a motion person. I think we need to take a vote on this. So I'm going to ask somebody to make a motion on option B with the caveat that we're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order on voting.
Okay, again, one of those rules is to make sure that Pasco has at least one person here. So, do we have anybody, any voting members?
Well, Commissioner Starkey had indicated that she would be here, but she would be late. And
Okay,
she just-
well, then we'll just delay the vote.
But she just sent me a text that said she just finished up with the meeting that she was in. She's an hour away, so I don't know, I didn't write back and say, you've got to come, we're taking a vote. But I mean, I guess in that case, you could say, okay, drive the hour, because we have to.
Well, we don't have 3 electeds from Hillsborough here today. We
So
have 2
again-
and an alternate.
Then what do we do?
We have to delay the vote to the next
Well, we
meeting.
don't have 5, that's not the rule in place now anyway.
It's not the rule in place now, so.
That is correct.
I
I
think-
just was trying to get us to a point where we could actually approve this.
May I make a suggestion? Maybe if you just can defer this till later in the meeting, and if she's here, great.
Right.
If not,
That's
it's
a good
not
idea.
governing your rules now.
We'll defer it.
So currently, our decision-making process is by consensus.
Mhm.
So we would ask if there is any opposition or serious concern to moving forward with the option B concept.
Right, so going back to just normal procedure, if we're actually going to have chairs and we're going to have a normal procedure, we would ask for a motion to approve, and then we would get into discussion, and that's when the dissension or comments and approval would come up.
Commissioner Merman, would it be possible, because it's not a statutorily authorized group anyway, could we adopt a rule amongst ourselves that the person or whoever it is missing could call in?
It would, but, the standard rule is someone can vote on the phone, but they cannot constitute your quorum. You have to have a quorum present. But they can vote, they can call in, they can vote. They
Correct.
just would not help you with your quorum.
Correct, except that T-BARTA is asking the legislature this year for an exception to that little tweak.
Oh, they are?
Because there are other state agencies who represent large regions that have that exemption. So given that there already exists in Florida law, that exemption for regional boards, which this one is, maybe we could consider that. I'm not an attorney, so, I'm just voicing my
Any
opinion.
thoughts?
Are you talking about this one vote, or are you talking about in general?
In general.
When we run into the kind of quandary that we're talking about now, could we hunt to that solution?
Can Catherine call in on her phone on the way here?
Right, because she is trying to listen in as we speak. And so, given that she listened in and that she was part of the discussion, I don't know,
We'll just defer the action to the end of the meeting. I don't think that's any big deal. Let's wait and see.
Because
I'd
you
rather
don't
have
a
her
quorum with
here.
Hillsborough here today either, but in addition to passing.
But we're not under those rules yet.
Oh, okay.
We're under those rules
Well,
after we
after we
vote.
vote.
Yeah, and then we're quickly not.
And then we're quickly
So we better
not
vote
in.
on everything else first
Yeah.
before we vote on these rules.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of,
I think
we know where we
I think
stand.
we've addressed the voting. That's good.
So
I do-
we know where we're at.
I have a couple of other items just for us to
Okay.
think about that aren't necessarily
Sure.
action for today. So the role of non-voting advisors. They are here primarily to provide technical or policy perspective to our discussions, and I think they've been invaluable in doing so. Would you like to consider asking a recommendation from the non-voting advisors prior to any vote of the leadership group? That would be a consideration, but that's generally the practice that we've used. And then we need to confirm the advisors because our purpose statement is a little vague in the listing of the advisors. We have invited the adjacent area MPOs. Our purpose statement currently only lists the Citrus Hernando MPO, and I think that's probably because it's District 7. But we have Manatee County, we have Polk County, which are encircling our region. We call them the shell MPOs and the core MPOs. The Florida Department of Transportation, Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority, Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council have all been invited and accepted as non-voting advisors. The others that aren't mentioned in our purpose statement would be independent transportation authorities, such as HART, PSTA, Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority, perhaps airport, port. And so we would need to sort of formalize that with the bylaws. Again, I don't need a vote on this, but I think we're looking for general consensus that that's the list of non-voting advisors. The cities and counties are reflected by the MPO membership, so I don't think we need to list them as non-voting advisors. Everybody clear on this? Any questions or direction that you want to provide on this?
I like the idea of having our partners here.
I do too.
And, it gets away from that silo stuff that we worry about sometimes and have conversation at tables. I'd like
Especially
that.
on the policy and, the process stuff. I don't think we need their opinion too much, but definitely the policy and
Okay.
technical.
Yep. All right, great. And then other considerations, just as we run these meetings a little bit differently. For public comment, we have typically reserved time at the beginning of each meeting, like we did today. Do we want to take comment from the public prior to vote? Do we want to seek input specifically from the advisors prior to the vote? Do we want to set limits on commenter time and or total comment time? These are just some things that we'd like you to think about. And we can come back to that, but each of the MPO's bylaws may need to change if we're establishing bylaws for this advisory body. So we would need to recognize the TMA leadership group, for instance, as a standing committee. And Commissioner Kemp, you have a question?
It was back at the other slide.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, because I see the Regional Planning Council here, in terms of like our Planning Commission in Hillsborough County, and some of those kind of as partners, some of the land use or planning or bringing that in, as well as the transportation-related entities. It's just a thought I'm raising here.
You mean under the advisors?
Yeah.
To include, I don't think everybody has a planning commission.
Right, they don't, but, so I'm not sure how, but I kind of think that incorporating or bringing that as part of it might be something that would be a good addition that we could use. I mean, we all talk about, looking at land use and transportation together, but we don't do it. And so I'm just, I don't have it fleshed out, but it feels like a very missing piece.
And just for clarification, the 3 Pinellas board members do represent our countywide land use planning agency. So we have that here.
And so we represent, we do our land use also. I guess it's just the technical experts perspective. So I think it just would vary on the issue per se, and I think we need to leave it up to staff to know that this is something that's important that we link the two together, land use and transportation, and they need to be sensitive to that for the items that we're discussing, and include those people as part of our advisors. Yes, Janet? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to just state for the record that I agree wholeheartedly with Commissioner Kemp, because and I know, Commissioner, you'll remember this because you were there, I do believe, when the state of Florida did away with the Department of Community Affairs. And
right.
Prior to that, the regional planning councils were incredibly instrumental in all of these type of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I think since they do currently exist, and both the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County government have seats on that board, that would be a great opportunity for us to mitigate the argument that we can't have a regional system because you can't have, one county dictating to another on planning and land use issues. But they are kind of a neutral party that could very well take on that role. Sean?
I would agree.
Speak up.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
good.
think it's important.
Yay!
Yeah, definitely important. Good point. Okay.
All right. So back to this slide, the last bullet point is the staff directors feel like we need to clarify the relationship and responsibilities between the TMA leadership group and that of TBARDA and the MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee, and just generally clarifying the roles at the regional and super regional level. For instance, we've been having some conversations with MetroPlan Orlando about the I-4 corridor, especially with Brightline having a proposal to connect Orlando and Tampa via higher speed rail, and the transportation system management and operations strategy that we're looking at the regional level, led by MetroPlan Orlando. So I think there's some clarifying language that we may want to bring back to you at your February meeting on this language, maybe perhaps with some bylaws, because there's some antiquated language in the Chairs Coordinating Committee responsibilities, and there are some responsibilities that TBARDA has that are a legacy of when it was the Transportation Authority, such as having responsibility for the regional multi-use trails, and some other aspects that maybe aren't as consistent with the new mission of TBARDA. So we're not ready to really get into the weeds of that today, but just really laying the groundwork that that's a future conversation that we need to think about, and whether we're being duplicative or whether we have vestiges of previous structures that we just don't need to really maintain anymore. But getting back to the question of public comment, are you comfortable with the way public comment has been handled and, for instance, was handled earlier in this meeting? Or do we want to look at any different forms of public comment now that we're having a voting mechanism?
Well, I definitely think the current form is, kind of normal procedure, I think, for most of us in our governments. But I do think next to the different items that we're taking up, there should be like something in red next to it that says vote required or approval needed, something like that, so that the public is aware that this is coming and there's going to be some approval needed going forward. Is that okay?
Identifying the action items.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Good suggestion.
And they'll know that they have a chance to speak to that
Absolutely.
item.
Yes.
So I think
In public comment. Absolutely.
And so what staff is recommending to you is that we'll bring back, based on this conversation today, a set of bylaws for this organization that you can review at your next meeting. And that would address some of these cleanup items as well. So next steps, we need to establish the order of the chairs, the rotation. We maybe need to consider a policy for meeting locations. I know our next meeting, Chunky, is in Hillsborough County at the Planning Commission, city-county building. But how do we want to establish that going forward? Do we want a policy? Do we want to formalize that, or do we want to leave it ad hoc? We'll draft the bylaws, as I mentioned, for February's meeting. And we'll also review and suggest those potential refinements. And I left this in here, not necessarily intentionally, but we were talking about different structures on Monday, and somebody quoted Catherine Egan, who was formerly with Hart, that sometimes you just have to find a pink unicorn that works for your region, and it may be mythical, but we'll keep looking for other options. But that's really just a placeholder to say, did we not think of anything that you think we ought to think of? And that's really all I wanted to cover today. Yes,
Quick question. Are we moving towards a monthly meeting, or are we moving towards a bi-monthly?
We're not proposing a monthly meeting, no, sir. We're proposing to keep the number of meetings the same.
6 a year, every other month?
I think it's been about 5 a year.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 to 5 a year.
Yeah.
Typically, we meet quarterly, and then occasionally we've had the need for an extra meeting.
I think it should follow the 5-3-2-1, Hillsborough, Pinellas, Pasco, and then the meeting should be where the chair is.
The chair should be
Meeting where the chair is.
should be where the meeting is, either way. That's just my suggestion.
So that would mean every other the third meeting would be in Pasco, the second meeting would be in Pinellas, and the first meeting would be in Hillsborough, for instance.
Right.
And we'll start that next year, since obviously we're not doing that today. Does everybody agree with that?
And
Just want to make sure.
the chair would be from that hosting community.
The chair and the host community work together, or the host county.
I would just add that it's really important that wherever the meetings are held, and I think it is important to hold it in Hillsborough County Center, a place, a public building where people are used to coming to and seeing, but also that has full streaming capabilities, because sound is always a problem when you're streaming. So I think that that's really significant that you have that capability, and we haven't been doing that, and also T-BARTA has not necessarily been doing that, and I think that that is very essential.
Any other feedback or direction on this slide? Beth, is there anything I'm not thinking of?
Is there, if we're going to call ourselves kind of a pink unicorn, is there anything like a TMA anywhere else in the state?
There's a little bit, but not really. South Florida, which has Miami-Dade, Broward, and West Palm, they have the Southeast Florida Transportation Council, SEPTEC.
Oh, I see. Okay. So
And that's really more like our Chairs Coordinating Committee, but it's, we're a hybrid between the Chairs Coordinating Committee, which is a larger county region, and this 3-county area.
Yeah.
And there are some other examples around the country, but that's probably the most pertinent. Okay, I think that's all I had. So thank you all very much. That was a very productive conversation, Commissioner Kemp.
Very good.
I'd just like to add, since you brought up the pink unicorn and the SEPTA, and I'm very interested in their model, but one of their slogans, or how they market, is 3 counties, 1 traveling public, and I think that that is very good.
Yeah, we need to have a slogan. And not have pink unicorn in the slogan.
No, I agree.
Kids may show up, think we're a toy shop or something.
I was actually supposed to delete that bullet point.
Yeah, we need a slogan. So why don't you 3 chairs work on that and come back.
What was that again?
3 counties, 1 traveling public. I think it's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.
That was very good. Thank you. Very concise, and that's very good. So now, Lisa Silva and Jim Meyer, they're going to, from AECOM, and Lisa's from our Hillsborough MPO, they are going to present It's Time Tampa Bay results.
Lisa Sola, Hillsborough MPO staff, and so I've been the project manager for the outreach portion of the It's Time Tampa Bay, coordinating with our other 2 partners, and AECOM and Jim Myers has been our consultant on that. So we've been reviewing and proofing the PowerPoint, but he's going to take the stage today.
All right, good morning. I think last time when I was here in May, I met with this group. I had about a 20-25 minute presentation that ended up being condensed into about 5 minutes, and you see we're about 35 minutes ahead on the agenda item today. So
that doesn't mean you have to.
I won't. I'll keep it to about 20 minutes here, and then we'll have questions. But Really happy to be here today to present the MetroQuest results. As I mentioned in May, we came to this committee and we showed you the survey that we were developing at that time. And if I had to summarize the results in one slide, here's kind of that overview. And I wanted to give you this slide just to present a little context as we start to move through the results and show you the different demographic data and that type of information. So we did have a great response rate. We set a record actually in terms of MetroQuest use. We had close to 10,000 surveys. We actually came in around 9,600, which set a record for MetroQuest in the United States to date. So some really great results, you know, and a lot of that, actually, all of that has to go to the credit of the MPO staffs. All three MPOs did a great job in getting the word out. We had a lot of success with social media, and I'll share some of those numbers. If you look at the results and just had to boil it down to real simple terms, what are we hearing? A lot of the response on transportation. People want to address traffic congestion, and they want alternatives to driving. If you look at land use, people are saying, you know, minimize outward growth. Let's reinvest in our neighborhoods, our downtown areas, and look at more walking and biking as options. As background, a lot of effort went into developing the survey, and I think that paid off in the end with the results. We had, in January, the three MPOs formed a working group that consisted of staff, it consisted of other consultants that were working on projects in the area, in the region. And we spent a lot of time in these working sessions. Some of them were 4 hours long that we went all the way through discussing the text, the material, the images. We did some refinement and testing in May and June, and really came up with what we felt was a good survey to go to the public with at the end of July, and it ran for a 2-month time period. So the survey ended at the beginning of October. We've been going through the information, analyzing that, and we had over 10,000 comments. We're still going through those comments, seeing how they all impact the key themes and the messaging that will provide guidance to you as you move forward with your LRTPs. But ultimately, the MPOs are going to be developing a hybrid scenario that will take kind of the best elements of all of the scenarios. You may recall, if you took the survey or from seeing the presentation back in May, we presented 3 scenarios, A, B, and C. The first one looking at new technologies, kind of driverless vehicles, looking at BRT concepts, building off of the premium transit study, the Central Avenue BRT concepts. Scenario B was more of a roadway focus that looked at expressway toll lanes, and scenario C was more of a transit focus, looking at rail, BRT, and water ferry in there as well. So the whole idea of this process was never to have the public vote on one of these scenarios and say we're going to go with scenario B or we're going to go with C. We really wanted to have these exaggerated scenarios and make people think, and ultimately come back and look at what people are telling us from each one to really help inform the process as we move forward and build consensus on what items really make sense. So one of the things that I tell people when we do these surveys, you know, you can develop the best survey possible, but if you don't get the word out there and get it out to the public, it doesn't really matter much. And so I think that 9,600 number that I mentioned, it just demonstrates what the 3 MPOs did working together. You know, developing a It's Time website where the MetroQuest survey was hosted, a number of presentations to committees, councils, and boards. The Florida Home Show over Labor Day weekend, we had between 600 and 700 survey responses in a 3 or 4 day period. So just some great outreach there. I know Whit and Beth had did a radio interview. We also did a social media push throughout the process, newspaper ads. And then I know Pinellas, Pinellas and Hillsborough had mail outs in different, I believe Pinellas was part of a utility mail out, and other apps that were utilized throughout the process. Social media was a great part of this effort. We had 34% of the visits to the survey actually came through Facebook ads and Twitter and Instagram. If you look at those different numbers there, we had over 360,000 impressions. So it takes a lot for when we send out these ads on Facebook. It really takes a lot of those to get people to actually go to the survey and fill it out. So the other thing that was very helpful here, the marketing partners of Tampa Bay Times, Beasley Media Group, the Florida Home Show, again, were partners that really helped push the word out about this effort. We had the online survey that was obviously our main survey instrument, but we wanted to provide some alternative options for the MPOs if they chose to use them. And we developed a matching hard copy survey that you see on the right hand of the screen. So this survey over here matched the online image. We also had a matching PowerPoint presentation that the MPOs could take to committees and walk people through it. So if people did not feel comfortable doing the online survey, they could do that paper survey, and those would be entered into the along with the online results. We also had a Spanish translation of the PowerPoint and the hard copy survey, again trying to make sure that we were reaching all demographics and providing everybody an opportunity to comment if they wanted to on this process. So now on to the fun stuff, the survey results. Wanted to just let you know in terms of what MetroQuest is and how that varies maybe from other surveys. So this is a self-select survey. We're pushing the survey out to as many people as possible. We want to get as many participants to take the survey. It's not intended initially to be, a statistically valid survey. So as comparison, Pinellas County did a statistically valid survey of 800 residents in the county. And that survey was a mail-out survey that's completed online or mailed back. Responses are mailed back. The survey group that does that will follow up with the people if they're not responding, and that you can actually go in and make sure you're hitting all your demographics. So that MetroQuest doesn't necessarily do that, but we did, as part of this process, wanted to make sure that we were getting good demographic coverage. So we checked the results kind of on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. We adjusted our Facebook and outreach to target zip codes that were underrepresented. And then ultimately we went through and looked at all of the results at the end to make sure that we had valid responses. And with it being that time of the year, and I spent a lot of time living in Chicago, vote early, vote often was the big thing up there. We went through to make sure that people weren't voting often on here, and so we really feel good that that data set that we have does represent a wide range of individuals. So a quick overview, the 2-month run from the end of July to the beginning of October, we had over 17,000 visitors. A visitor is somebody who actually clicks into the survey, and once they begin answering questions, they become a participant. So we had around 54% participation rate, which is about standard for MetroQuest. We had over 234,000 data points, so all of this information of people rating and comments, over 10,000 comments, over 5,600 emails where individuals were then entered into a drawing where they could win Buccaneers, Lightning, or Performing Arts tickets. So our final data set, when we did some cleanup, which is pretty standard here, We had a few surveys that might have been left blank. Those were taken out. We ended up with 9,575 participants. Just put up this slide real quickly because, I think when you look at the overall effort from the start to the finish, a lot of times when you do these surveys, you kind of see the spike at the beginning and it kind of flattens out and then some more spikes along the way. We really had strong effort all the way through, and I think, again, that goes back to a really strong social media outreach and the MPOs doing their own effort to push this survey out. The column on the left here, the red column represents the 3-county area, the percentage of the population by county. The purple columns represent the survey response rate. So we ended up having a slightly higher response rate from Hillsborough County. Pinellas was population around 1/3 of the 3-county area, 26% rate, and Pasco also just slightly below. We did have good coverage throughout the area. We asked people on the survey on the last page to provide their home and work zip code. We had about 70% of the respondents who provided some information there. Hillsborough, we had 4,000 home zip codes. Pinellas, we had 1,700, and Pasco, we had 800. But we had good coverage across the area. Show you some of the demographics, and this is one of the ways that we're checking to see what the results are looking like. In terms of employment, and you'll see these little purple lines up here, those are all of the survey participants that average. So and then we've broken it down by Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco County. And then the red would be if that participant did not provide a zip code. So when we're looking at the kind of averages across the 3 counties, we're seeing pretty consistent across the board. The unemployment rate of those who reported that they're currently unemployed was in the range of about 3 to 5%, which is consistent with what you would be looking at in the region. The one area that, if you kind of are looking at this, spikes a little bit, if you did not provide a zip code, 25% of those respondents were students. So not surprising there. If you live in the area, maybe from another state, do you put your home zip code from another state? Do you even know your zip code where you're living in the dorms? I think these results make a lot of sense. In terms of the income, you can see these 2 kind of groupings here that spike in the middle. This middle group has a lower threshold of a household income of $55,000 a year. So if you're comparing that to the region, we're tending to skew a little bit on the higher side of the income. But when we do some checks to kind of look at across the different income levels, if there was any significant differences in responses, we weren't seeing that. The same in terms of race and ethnicity. Pie chart up here on the left, we had 77% of respondents identified as white. Hillsborough had a slightly smaller number at 72, Hispanic population at 11%, and African American at 7%. So we were under in terms of the demographics for the region. But this is something that we looked at in more detail. We actually had a call with MetroQuest to discuss with them. They took a look at the numbers, and again, there was no significant difference really between the breakdowns of responses for the scenario responses, the elements. So we feel really good about the data set, and that there's some good information here to draw guidance off of for your LRTPs. So we had the 7 priorities as part of the survey. We asked people to rank their top 5. We found that the average was about 4.1, so a few people ranked maybe 3 or 4. Didn't rank all of those, but what we found is pretty clearly some things that jumped out. The first tier of priorities, as I mentioned on the first slide, traffic jams and alternatives to driving. About 74-75% of all survey respondents identified this as a priority. The second tier, preserving open and green space, shorter commutes, fell into about the 62 to 64%. And then the other ones kind of fell off from there. Couple quick notes. If you look at Pinellas County, alternatives to driving was actually slightly higher than traffic jams. They also, 57% of Pinellas respondents rated storm vulnerability, which was about 6 to 8% points higher than the other counties. So just something to kind of take note of there. In terms of Pasco, shorter commutes was actually the third priority over preserving open and green space. Not by a whole lot, but it did come in there. So next area we want to talk about are the results of the scenarios. If you look at scenario A, again, kind of focusing in on new technologies. What we did on the graphic, again, people could rate each scenario and each element 1 to 5. And so we combined 1 and 2. So anything you see here would kind of be a lower opinion or rating of a scenario. A 3 is kind of a neutral, and a 4 or 5 would be a higher rating or more favorable opinion. And then we have the average rating of each of those broken out by county. So you can see in this first scenario A that, you know, it's relatively kind of an even split across all of the categories. There's a little bit higher, 40% here of all participants rating this as a 1 or 2. So, you know, some of the comments we saw here, I think people are still skeptical about driverless vehicles and have concerns, but there still is interest in a number of these elements. If you look at the expressway concept, expressway toll lanes, converting a portion of I-275 was a concept that was in there as well. This scenario was 52% of all respondents rated this low. Actually, Pinellas County came in at 58% with a lower rating. By comparison, Pasco rated this one slightly a little bit higher. This is kind of a theme that you'll see throughout the survey results here, that Pasco tended to favor more of the roadway improvements. Pinellas was leaning more towards the transit. And then the last scenario, which received overwhelming response, favorable response, was the transit scenario, which came in at 75%, rating this as a very high, or 4 or 5 stars, and the average rating coming in over 4%. And that was really consistent across all of the counties. A slight difference here, but nothing significant between Pasco and what the overall averages were. So I'll run through the elements very quickly, and again, what we wanted to do is take a look at what the scenarios were. We pulled out elements from those scenarios and had people, we asked them to rate those specifically. And so this first graph is really intended, I'm not going to run through each one of these, but take a look more at what you're seeing here in terms of the different types of elements. So we've coded those with the yellow circles being transit, the green boxes being community elements. And so the most favorable ratings, these green bars, are on the left, and then it moves to the right, becoming less favorable. Statewide rail, local regional rail were the top elements, followed by the community elements were preserving neighborhoods, better downtowns, more efficient land use, walking and biking. All of that very consistent. If you look at kind of the taxes and fees, the funding questions, people were willing to fund rail, special districts, or impact fees. But you know, if you're funding buses, new lanes with tolls, roadways tended to be more on the right side. The I-275 Boulevard and expanded growth areas coming in as the least favorable of all of the elements. So just to quickly run through each one of the elements, again, moving left to right would be more favorable in terms of the ratings, least favorable. Expanded and new ramps and interchanges, 55% approval. Advanced technology, 46% approval, even though people are still kind of, have concerns or want to know more about it. Elevated toll roads, again, coming in about 46% approval. The I-275 conversion, a 55% really have an unfavorable view of that. So this graphic is really just intended to show where there were differences. If there's red arrows, that means Pinellas County rated the concept of a loop scenario that would create a new road or connection in Pasco and coming down to Pinellas. They rated that lower than all of survey participants. So in this case, Pinellas and Pasco had even less favorable views of an I-275 conversion, for example. And again, if you look at the green arrows, Pasco tended to have higher favorability of these roadway elements for that particular category. So take a quick look. I'm going to go back real quick. So you'll see the scale here stays the same. If you take a look at where the roadway elements came in, and then you take a look at where the transit elements are coming in. So rail is coming in at 82% here, overwhelmingly the highest scores that we saw out of the survey. Express BRT, 55% approval. Water ferry also had approval. Expanded ride sharing, kind of a neutral opinion of that. The only real difference across the counties, water ferry and expanded ride sharing was lower in Pasco, which you would tend to think or would be consistent with who would be using that probably most often in Hillsborough and Pinellas counties. Community elements, as I mentioned earlier, all four of these that kind of focus in on more efficient use of land, had approvals in the 60s to 70%. Expanded growth, people really at 55% did not favor that. Differences, Pinellas favored more of preserving neighborhoods and walking and biking. A little lower on expanded growth and land use, not that, I think this is just the reality of Pinellas is built out. And so these concepts to people probably don't mean as much as some of these other ones when you're looking at rating those. But Pasco County did have a little bit higher rating, a little more willing to accept some expansion and growth. The funding elements, two of the funding elements for rail and special district fees or impact fees rated above 50%.
Yeah. I just
Yes.
want to have, can you go back to the other one? I just have a question about the way, because all the charts are done that way. No, I think
The one after that?
just those, because you keep doing these. And I understand the green arrows up and the red arrows down, but a lot of times, so is that just neutral when you do like Hillsborough?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so if it's gray, it's neutral. So actually
I just wanted to get a better.
Yeah. Sorry about that. And so in the report that we have, we actually have the numbers and the differences that go with this. But so if it's gray, it would just be consistent falling within that same average for all participants. So the funding strategies, little less, so 1 and 2 star ratings came in at about 42–44%. And actually some of the comments I should mention when you talk about express toll lanes, people don't like toll lanes, but they like the express part of it. So if you can find a way to do express lanes without paying for them, you're going to be doing great.
Do a lottery.
The lottery.
So, again, just to wrap up on some of these differences, Pinellas County favored, had a little bit higher favor of fees for rail. And if you kind of look at the Pasco numbers, the green arrows, again, kind of support more of the roadway improvements. Red arrows are a little less favorable for transit improvements. So just kind of a summary of what you saw there, preserving neighborhoods in terms of growth and land use. Some very high numbers there for more efficient land use elements. We had more negatives. The boulevard concept, expanded growth area, about only 26% favored those. I'm not going to read through this slide here, but it just summarizes, again, kind of the rail at the top at 80% going down to where we generally saw more positives than negatives. And then we had some other concepts over on the right-hand side that were kind of in the neutral category. So, you know, kind of 3 stars, or we're fairly close in the 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 ratings. So to wrap up, there's a lot of information that came out of this survey, and I think we've got a couple points here that build off of, you know, where do you head with this in the LRTP planning process. And so in terms of growth and land use, again, the concepts that focused on the high ratings of really efficient land use really would suggest that you want to promote through your comprehensive planning process for communities that reinvest in neighborhoods, strengthen downtowns. People want more downtown-like areas and really minimize outward growth. So keeping that more concentrated, reducing public service and utility costs. From a transportation element, obviously the rail received the highest support and would seem to make sense to include as part of the LRTP projects, to look at those. Whit mentioned the Bright Line, potentially from Tampa Bay to Orlando. There was talk of, or people mentioned streetcars, looking at other rail options throughout the area. Also important to look at BRT and other express bus options that would connect to rail. So it's not just about one rail being the solution, but it would be about looking at other options there as well. Another strategy here, looking at elevated express lanes. This could be a possibility in the downtown Tampa interchange area. It also rated pretty high in the Pasco survey results. It could be something that's looked at in the 54-41 corridor, maybe with an elevated interchange possibly. And really, again, looking at tolls, using that really to reduce congestion, not raising revenue. And then to wrap up here, just a few others that, again, rated really high and should be thought about is including in the plan. Expanded new interchange ramps, again, Hillsborough, Pasco, those rated pretty high. Walking and biking, big support for that. Again, Pinellas coming in with their top priority as alternatives to driving. And then public support for I-275 Boulevard conversion just wasn't there. And then I think technology and how that incorporates, or how we address that in the LRTP is still an important part. But I think as we move forward, I think the LRTP, if it can demonstrate to people and educate people, you know, I think there is this uncertainty out there still around that. And so the LRTP process moving forward can help in that area as well. So I'll take any questions if anybody has any.
Okay, this is actually Commissioner Eggers' watch said we all need to stand up. Yes, we watches. So if y'all want to stand for a second, you're welcome to. Anyway, Commissioner Eggers.
Yeah, just real quick on that last one. It said new expanded interchange ramps. What are you getting at there? What was that question?
Yeah, so each one of these on the survey had a little bit more description, and it's spelled out in a report that we're putting together. But you can see here the example of a more efficient diverging diamond, divergent interchange. You know, so looking at rather than large segments, trying to enhance capacity at these interchange areas to move traffic more efficiently and kind of more targeted roadway investment.
Actually, Secretary Gwynn, would you like to comment further on that? Because I know you're spending a lot of time with your staff looking at interchanges.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we're actually even doing one at Big Bend that's really going to be, I set the standard for what they need to look like.
You know, we're
we have, if you want to look at the bigger, longer-term picture, we're developing all the segments for the Tampa Bay Next program that will be interstate modernization that go all the way through the county line on I-4, goes all the way down to Manatee County and up through Hernando County. And they provide the long-term needs. Of course, we'll never be able to build them all at once. But then as we get certain areas like Big Bend that need to be done sooner, we look to do them and build them to what's going to be the ultimate need, as opposed to just quicker fixes. So,
But also a more modern type concept.
Yes.
Like what you did in, I guess, Sarasota?
Yeah, in fact, we're getting ready to start construction on a diverging diamond interchange at in Wesley Chapel at State Road 56 and the interstate. But we're also in the stages of designing a diverging diamond interchange at I-75 and MLK. So we're looking at those types of interchanges. We're also doing that with major intersections, looking at continuous flow intersections, different concepts, see where they work, displaced left turns. And I know you probably don't know what that is, but they're new and different ways to look at moving traffic through intersections. So both interchanges and intersections, we're looking at new types of things, and roundabouts as well.
We're also doing that for US 19 in Pinellas County. The department's looking at options for some of those interchanges that we have planned in our long-range plan. So they're, it's a good conversation to have.
Well, this was excellent result. I mean, the number of results and the social media presence was, I mean, 265,000 impressions on Facebook. I don't think that's unheard of.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you want to?
No, I was just going to make one point on the results, because again, we did have close to 10,000. What's kind of interesting when you look at survey responses, and you see political surveys that have 400 or 500, and so when we started looking at these results that came in on scenarios A, B, and C, if you actually track that from when we had about 500 surveys and then about 3,000, 6,000 in our final data set, the averages don't move. They very, very small percentage. So what we're really doing is, we're taking a survey that, if you had 400 or 500 responses, you'd be like, okay, these are great, but do they really reflect what the whole region wants? And so when you get that number up there to 10,000, we're just building a bigger data set that we can start to break down a little bit and make sure it's valid. So we feel very good about the results that we have here in the data set. So it's a lot of good information.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'd like to keep using the word data set. So I think that's important. It's all data set, metrics, et cetera, that this is based on. When you threw this hybrid scenario and those elements together, I'm assuming those were based on the same kind of thought process. I mean, these aren't subjective statements. These are based on the results of the survey.
Yes.
So there's some relative strength of each one of those bullet points.
So what we had is the 3 scenarios that people could rate each one of those. And then we had the 20 elements that people would go through and rate 1 to 5 as well. So, and the elements we pulled out basically from the scenario. So we really wanted to kind of drill down. We wanted to get some initial reaction on the scenarios. But yeah, each one of those had, had a description that went with it, so people could understand what they were voting on.
Again, metrics driven, data driven, not subjective.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So this is really some great information, and Whit mentioned performance measures, and so really this focus of actually having something that numbers that you can point to say, hey, this is guiding our effort is really something great here. So
I would say the elements are probably more important than the scenario.
Absolutely.
Evaluation.
Yep.
And that's why I was asking.
I just had a quick question. When I took the survey, it allowed you to click on a button, and when you put your priorities in there, it says how each scenario.
Yes.
I was curious how there was one in there for equal opportunity, but I didn't really see where it describe what that meant.
And I don't recall the, I know Johnny, so let me back up. As each one of these scenarios were modeled and compared, and then they pulled, the MPOs did that work to pull out the information so we could see the impacts there. Equal opportunity, I don't remember, Beth, do you recall exactly what the?
Sure, thank you. We worked on the performance metrics that then plugged into the platform. And so those are actually results out of the regional travel demand model. And so we looked at commute length and compared, average commute length at both time and distance for the region as a whole to what it would be for folks living in environmental justice designated travel analysis zones.
Okay. I was just curious what it was.
Yeah, it was good. I just thought it was a very strong survey. The thing that hit me the hardest was how strong people felt about preserving neighborhoods. I mean, did you all notice that?
Mm-hmm.
People feel very strongly about where they live, and they don't want anything to disrupt that, which I get, and we hear that a lot.
Yes, we do.
So I think that's important information for us as policymakers, especially going forward, because we want to make improvements to transportation, yet we have to make those improvements with the thought about they also don't want growth to impede the transportation access any further. So it gets back to land use and how we need to integrate that into what we're doing. So I think it's really was a very important statement to me, especially going forward with policy that we make, especially in Hillsborough, because we have so much growth and it just took off like a rocket and our roads stayed the same. So.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of, it is pretty broad here and a lot of good information here. I also noticed people wanting walkability, the high rankings of bicycling, the high ranking of neighborhood preservation, the high ranking of transit, and the high ranking of rail were all things that really stood out to me on this whole survey. And I think, to take it to heart and be thinking about how we can integrate this for me in Hillsborough County will be important. But I agree with you. I think we do in Hillsborough County, there's a lot more threat to neighborhoods and walkable communities. And I also think that this matches what I feel is a shift in consciousness, and not just among millennials who are desirous of, my kids included, who wouldn't want to live anywhere. My daughter doesn't want to live anywhere. It's out of her realm to move anywhere. She doesn't live in Tampa, where she has to own a car. She won't even consider moving there. So I think I think we really need to start thinking about the future and what we do in terms of, and part of it is a market, I think, is shifting that way because of what people are desiring. It's almost not on our shoulders. But I see this as very much mirroring what I know or what I seem to be hearing from people my age, younger, and people looking at the future, what they want, the walkable communities, the neighborhoods, the lesser commute or the no commute, and the transit options. And again, I have been a big speaker to the conversion of the CSX rail to commuter rail in the region. I think that we would be foolish not to be, I just do, not to be thinking forward about how we move forward on that. So I'll just, but I think this survey confirms a lot of that.
Okay. I also think Brightline was important in the survey. It came up, and I think it would be good for the MPO directors to get together to see when the timing would be right to incorporate that into our priorities. to support. I know they're not asking for that right now, but maybe we should express our support through a letter or something. I don't know. You all discuss it and come back to us. Okay? Very good. Thank you so much. Do you have another comment?
Just one comment, just what Commissioner Kemp was talking about. I think one of the other things that struck me a little bit was, though neighborhoods are important, connectivity is also still important, and how we go about doing that. And Trent, I look at it like in 50 to 100 years we're going to be at this spot, and 50 to 100 years we're kind of there's always a transition element to every generation, and I think we're struggling with that a little bit because funding is important, funding sources are important, and I think people really want to see a good plan. It's like, okay, rail's good, they said that was good, but it's still not good if we don't have a good plan that connects. And so I think we really have to keep developing those things, I think, more and more so that people really believe. And now that makes sense. And, oh, by the way, it has rail in it. Good. Yeah. Rail's a tool. It's nothing more than, but if it works and fits in a big plan, I think people will embrace it more.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. That was great. Really good. And then Sarah McKinley, she's from the Hillsborough MPO, and Chelsea Vivero from Forward Pinellas are going to introduce the Strategic Intermodal System 2045 Cost Feasible Plan.
Well, thank you. We're going to go over the 2045 SIS Cost Feasible Plan. The SIS are the roadways that FDOT identifies as having the highest priority for the economy and mobility across the state of Florida. DOT prioritizes the projects for the SIS, and they update their SIS plan every few years to account for changing conditions, just like we update our long-range plans, and then the MPOs have an opportunity to provide comment on that. Each of the MPOs has reviewed these, and we wanted to walk through what projects are included on those SIS facilities in each county and what the MPO's comments were for them. So in Pinellas County, the SIS projects included interchanges along US 19, lane continuity improvements along I-275, the replacement of the Gandy Bridge, and the Gateway Express connection down to Roosevelt Boulevard by 9th Street.
All right, in Hillsborough County, the projects included the I-275 Innovation Corridor, and a lot of these also included interchange enhancements. So looking at the State Road 60 Memorial interchange, as well as I-75 north of downtown, all the interchanges from MLK to Pierce, I-4 from Mango Road all the way to Park Road, and then also I-75, Gibsonton Drive and Big Bend were there as well. Okay. There was also the managed lanes. This is along the I-75 corridor throughout all of Hillsborough County, and then also I-4 all the way to the Polk County line. There were a couple capacity projects looking at road widenings. State Road 60, this is sort of the east portion of the county from Dover to the Polk County line, as well as US 41 around the port area from Pendola Point to Causeway Boulevard, and then the Gandy Bridge PD&E.
John,
Hi, so the areas of concern for Pasco, as you know, 41 and 54 is a big area right now. We're doing a PD&E with FDOT to look at 3 alternatives, and no build. One might actually be an elevated over 41. So we have a lot of projects that are including intersections and some ITS stuff along 54. So that's our biggest growth corridor. And then there's some stuff along I-75. It's one of our economic development corridors. And so the managed lanes might assist with that. Also, it will assist with the Catalyst project that currently is underway through Tibarda. And then we have a diverging diamond that's going out on I-75 that was mentioned earlier, so that's going to be a significant project. It's only going to be 3 years of traffic disruption, so if you're headed that way, just keep that in mind.
Thanks for the warning.
All right, so the comments that we provided, Pinellas County, or sorry, Port Pinellas, we've already submitted a letter to FDOT with our comments. We've actually received a response from them, so I have copies of that I'm going to share with you today. But the comments that we provided regarding the interchange at Klosterman on US 19, the language that was included in the SIS plan calls for an interchange improvement. Because we are currently reevaluating what that should look like along the US 19 corridor, we requested that FDOT either modify the language or remove that from the plan until we can better identify what that improvement is going to look like at Klosterman. For the Gandy Boulevard, Brighton Bay interchanges, this has been in the plans for a while to connect the overpasses at MLK and 4th Street along Gandy Boulevard all the way out to the Gandy Bridge. That project was not shown in the plan, so we asked that it be added. And then we had the same comment for the US 19 interchanges at Alderman and Tarpon. The Alderman interchange, again, was spelled out as an interchange. We asked them to either modify the language or remove it from the plan. And the interchange along US 19 at Tarpon Ave, our MPO actually removed that from the long-range plan about 2 years ago as we continued to identify what that ultimate improvement should look like. And then the Gateway Express connection to Roosevelt Boulevard, that was identified out in the 2029 to 2045 portion of the plan. We asked that that be advanced for construction to an earlier date. And we also asked that the Gandy Bridge construction be advanced as well.
Again, I spoke about the interchange improvements throughout Hillsborough County. A big one is the State 60 Memorial Interchange in West Shore. We're asking that that be advanced as a top priority, as well as I-75 at Gibsonton and Big Bend. Those continue to be major priorities of the county and the MPO, so we're asking that those move forward as well. The State Road 60 widening, this again is the far eastern portion of Hillsborough County, so we're asking for clarification on the need of this widening. And then also US 41 at Pendola Point is constrained in the county's comprehensive plan. So we're sort of clarifying that and stating that they need to work with Hillsborough County and possibly updating the comprehensive plan for that project.
Okay. So another comment that we had, currently SIS funding is only available for the SIS facilities, obviously, and they're all roadways. So we've requested that this funding be made available for transit, for capital and operating, including in managed lanes, and then it'd be expanded from just fixed guideway. And you had a comment on the CSX?
Yeah, our only comment on the CSX line was we were asking for it to be considered north of 54, and so at this time they tentatively told us that it doesn't rise to a level of a compelling need. So I would assume until we do, if we do some kind of an assessment of the CSX line, would it then be considered more seriously? So, but we've requested it nonetheless.
All right, and with that, we're actually seeking consensus from this group on the staff comments on the SIS facilities, and also if you had any additional comments for the SIS.
But
yes.
First, I guess, provide a little. We did provide some responses, I know. For instance, on the US 19 comments, we're going to work together with you all to figure out what's. I would note, though, I mentioned to you that I got a letter from the county saying that they didn't necessarily agree with that, so we need to bring them into the mix and figure out what the reasons for that were. The Gandy project does include the Brighton Bay interchange there, so that won't be a problem. A couple of things I did want to mention on the West Shore interchange. Really, we would like to try to have that be named as a #1 regional priority in terms of the SIS funding. We lost that money a couple of years ago because they didn't think we had consensus in the region on what we wanted to do with what was then the TBX program. I've been working hard with our folks in Tallahassee who helped assign the SIS funding, and one of the things they've told me is that you got to come with a regional consensus. Is this what you want? Because we don't want to put it in a program and have to move it out again. We want to be sure that everyone's solid on this. And if you look at what we're doing right now, we've got the Howard Franklin Bridge that's getting ready to start construction probably a year or two from now. It's going to be in procurement starting in January. That'll take about 4 to 4.5 years to complete. We'll have the gateway completed by then, so we'll have the gateway, we'll have the Howard Franklin Bridge. We've already got the lane continuity and express lanes down to City of St. Pete in the 5-year work program. All that will be fixed, but then it's going to hit the West Shore interchange. What we've found in public meetings is that the biggest opposition to the interstate modernization projects is really up in the downtown interchange area, the interchange area around I-4 and 275. There is not a lot of opposition that we've seen to the improvements that are really in the West Shore area up to the river. And so what we would be looking to try to do is to get all of the MPOs in the region, the counties, and the cities, as much as they would be feel willing to do so, to either provide us with something, it could be a resolution, a letter saying that they concur that segments 4 and 5 of the Interstate Modernization Plan, which is connecting the veterans, connecting downtown and West Shore, that also allows us to do some transit improvements in that area, as we said, connect some streets that are disconnected now, which would take some of the pressure off the streets like West Shore, where you have to go there to get through the interstate. If we could get that concurrence from all of the parties, I think we would have a very good chance to bring that money back to Tampa. What happened was, quite honestly, what happened was they said, we need that money in a lot of places. You're not ready for it. We're going to give it to Orlando. We don't want that to happen again. We want to say give it to us. But we need that consensus that we can go up there. We're going to have, obviously, a new governor. Very likely could be a new secretary. And we'd like to bring that to them as an entry point to say, this is what the Tampa Bay region wants. It's a lot of money, about $1.4 billion. And I know Jacksonville's shooting for it, South Florida's shooting for it, but we got to have something that we can show them that, yep, we're ready, we've gone through all this process. I'm saying that, assuming that that would be what you all would agree on, but that was something I think is going to be very important. That interchange is going to tie a lot of things together, and we really need it. I would also, I wanted to touch real quickly on earmarks, if possible. I know the MPOAC fellow talked about it the other day, and I thought he did a really good job of presenting that. And hopefully everybody understands the earmarks. And some of the local elected officials have been putting in earmarks. Earmarks are not new money to the DOT budget. What it's basically doing is telling DOT you have to modify your budget to accommodate these new projects. And in order to accommodate that, we got to find other places to move the money around. Years ago, from what I understand, I wasn't here, but years ago there were little boxes of money around that were kind of reserves, and they were out there, and over the time, I think a lot of the legislators figured out there's extra money that we can try to access. And so what DOT's done over the years
How did you find out that we found out?
I don't know. But we found, now what's happened is that they say, we can't have those anymore. We got to put it on projects. And so all the money's been put on projects. And so what they're telling us now, this last round of earmarks, they really scrambled. They had to move a few projects around, but they don't have anything hardly left. The other challenge is that the revenue estimating conference, people who come in and tell us what their projections are for our revenue, are now saying that they're going to have to reduce some of the estimates in the future because of fuel efficiency, electric cars, and other things that are decreased the gas tax revenue. So what I'm saying is it's going to be awful hard in the future for earmarks, especially if they're significant earmarks, to be able to go through without us having to take things out of our district's MPO's work plans. The other thing is that if you put an earmark in and it goes to the governor and he vetoes that earmark, what happens is not only does that money for that project go away, but we also lose that money. For instance, if somebody put in a $60 million earmark and it got vetoed, you don't get that project, and you also lose $60 million for your work program because you lose that budget authority. So I guess what I'm saying is we prefer not to have earmarks. We prefer for the projects to come in through the normal process that we follow. And we've got to be prepared for the consequences if an earmark goes in, it's not successful. In addition to losing money, we can't put any state money on it for at least a year of any type. So if we already had more money associated with it, we couldn't even do that. That would be vetoed. The other thing I just wanted to mention was on the SEIS, we were planning and have had for a while now workshops scheduled for December. We've discussed it quite a bit, and we're looking now at moving those out to February. And the primary reason is that, as you probably, I'm sure you know, I guess November 8th, proposals will come in for Brightline. I should say Brightline. Proposals will come in for something on I-4 Porter. It could be Brightline and maybe somebody else. I don't know, but we at least know that Brightline is going to come in, and so those are going to be being evaluated through the whole month of November. And at the end of November, they're supposed to make a decision on if they think that's something they want to do. Which, depending on where Brightline or someone else decides they want to enter or exit the I-4 median, it's going to have a big impact on how we are able to accommodate it in our plans. We also don't know, there's been talk about whether someone coming in this proposal would be eligible to tie on to the previous record of decision for the high-speed rail. That's kind of a legal question, I think, at this point. But if they were, they certainly would be able to come in right through the area that we're currently showing some of our options for the downtown interchange. So I guess what I'm saying is that we didn't want to just come in there and then not have taken into account what that is. So we're looking to move that to February. We don't think that will extend the total schedule, and we're going to look for our record of decision on the SEIS. But that was something that we just decided in the last couple of days. So that those workshops will be moved from December probably to February. So I think that answered most of the questions.
Those are really good comments. I got an earmark last year. He knows it. I did, through a senator to help Big Ben. And I think I've realized that they were going to help us anyway, and I probably didn't need to do that. And so I'm probably going to be a better girl this year and not be proactive in that way, because I have respect for the work program. As you know, as a former legislator, it is the process, and if you do lose, and there's always a lot of vetoes in transportation on those member projects, it does reduce the work program, and you cannot fund anything on that project for at least a year. That's bad. So you've not only set your project back, but you've lost money for transportation. So you got to realize what you're getting into when you even think about it. But I guess it comes up also about transit, HARP, and PSTA. How do we do that? I mean, because they need funds.
Right. Well, we've been trying to get as much funds as we can through our central office folks. In fact, we've gotten a good amount for various projects. For the SIS, that has to be a legislative. They have to change the law in order for us to be able to provide those funding through the SIS program. I'm not opposed to it. It's just we're not allowed to do it. And so if it's changed by the legislature, we certainly would have that option. We're going to try to get more creative with how we can fund transit. I mean, obviously the referendum is going to be a big question. If it passes, then that changes our versus what if it doesn't. But I think we've got some really good people thinking right now about how do we increase the transit. We've got a new partner that's going to help us be even more creative, right? Looking for options, but
say yes, David.
we know that we need to improve the transit system. I mean, the latest things I see, we got 1,000 people a day moving into Florida. We've got businesses that are growing. We've got freight through our ports. You know, all that stuff is just adding to the interstate and the local. And I think we have to remember that, you know, as we're improving the neighborhoods and walkability and doing complete streets and having things that we can do, like we're looking in the Heights Mobility Study and other things that we can do, we got to keep the interstates healthy as much as we can, or that traffic's going to get out and start driving down those other streets. I mean, traffic is like water. It flows with the least resistance. And eventually, if that is so bad that they don't want to go on the interstate, they're going to get off and go somewhere else. So we got to try to keep as much as possible the interstate going. And you know, the express lanes, we talked about what some of the folks thought about express lanes in the survey. You know, I think most of you know the money you put on the express lanes isn't really that much for the revenue. That's not really the main point of pricing it. The main point of pricing it is to try to keep a reliable travel time by creating a, if you want to call it an incentive or disincentive to use it. Do you really want to use it today? Do you have to be somewhere by a certain time? You'll pay the toll. If it starts to be more people want to go, the toll goes up. But that's just to keep that as a reliable travel time corridor. A lot of these things are not mutually exclusive of the others. But we really do need to make sure that the interstate system continues to be able to provide a mass capacity for what we're going to see continuing to grow.
Exactly. Okay, Mr. Blanton and then Commissioner Kim.
Thank you. Secretary Gwynn, I had a question about intermodal centers. The West Shore Intermodal Center is part of the strategic intermodal system, but the department's also doing 5 intermodal center studies, including one in our gateway area. Is it sort of the intention that as those intermodal center feasibility studies are done and they're incorporated into a plan, that they would be added to the SIS and could be funded through SIS dollars? Because the intermodal centers really are the touchstones of our transit network, and even these alternative transit ideas that are coming out need to connect into somewhere where we have a gathering point.
Right. And
it's possible. I mean, tying it to a SIS facility is what would make them eligible. I mean, if they were, but it's possible that they could be eligible for SIS funding.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think they've done the other thing, we're looking at is some sort of public-private partnership for those centers, where we could certainly, West Shore, it could be developed as more than a modal center. And so there may be opportunities to even fund a lot of those things through that type of an arrangement. And those are things we're looking at now. I know Ming is, hopefully they're going to be wrapping the study up in not too long, and then we'll have a better idea of where to go in those.
And just to clarify for everybody's reference on the transit in the strategic intermodal system, you can use SIS dollars for fixed guideway transit, is my understanding. And I think what we're asking the legislature to consider is a broader definition of what transit eligibility would be, like in a managed toll lane or something like that. And I've spoken to Senator Roussan about that. He filed a bill last year. He's willing to file a bill again this year. So that should be something that we collectively should ask our legislative delegation to support.
Okay, and this body can do letters too.
Absolutely.
And with the amount of elected members we have. Okay, Commissioner Kim, then Beth Alvin, then Commissioner Eggers, then Commissioner. Okay, he's going to let Commissioner Long go before Eggers. Okay, Commissioner Kim.
That raised a whole host of questions for me, some of the things that were brought up in the conversation just had. But one thing is, and I'm sorry to, so is this the entire SIS map up there now? But I don't see this like CSX in there.
That's not a SIS map. That's because there's roadways on there.
Right, that's what
that's not a
so I was looking at, but the CSX, when you said to the Pasco County line, it's part of the SIS.
There are CSX corridors that are included in the SIS.
It's not the whole, all of them?
No, they have to support a regional system, like the Brooksville line, I believe, stops. And there's criteria, I don't have it. The fact that Brooksville line, I don't think continues on. It doesn't have a further north connection, so so that there's specific guidance. But a lot of the SIS corridors, like the one along 60 that comes through, that's SIS eligible. connects to the port.
Right, so I know I've looked at it before, but it struck me when I was just looking at this, that there was no CSX, so I appreciate that clarification. I'll look more. In terms of the CIS, as I understand it, the legislature in Florida, and not all states have this, but passed something, I think in 1998, to fund the CIS at 50% of the funding we have, but that we have traditionally elected to focus and fund the CIS, and I don't know, I guess that's the governors and the DOT secretary statewide has put us at a 75%, or that is the goal, seemingly 75% on the CIS. And I think that that's a real big question to be discussed, because I personally would like to see less of the focus on the CIS. I'm all for system preservation and all for what we need to do, but I think our CIS is, our focus is overfunded. As we know, there will be less funding, as you said, from, and I think we, will be moving to electric vehicles. It won't be a gas tax system, and I think that's a lot to be considered in the future. And as we talk about improving these intersections or adding lanes to the CIS and putting more traffic on it, however it may be, we may, I know it was said, well, we have to worry then if we don't do that, that we'll have them on our arterial roadways and all that. But I have to say that as we increase this massive roadway going through our systems, those cars get off somewhere and they're packing the local roads and the arterials and everything already. So, I mean, I think our lack of focus, our ultra focus on the CIS, and as I understand, there's some rethinking of this in some other places, and I think that should be also something we rethink. As far as the intermodal systems centers, I've been very curious about what those are, since we don't seem to really have intermodal. We just seem to have cars, a few buses, and mostly walking. And they look to me like they're, I think that the whole, whatever we're calling that, I don't call it a transit system. I call it a parking garage system, a regional parking garage system, I think is what the plan is, and that's what the intermodal centers look like to me. And I don't think it's something that bodes well for our future and is not a good priority. And so I hope that we start really thinking that, and I would not want CIS money to go into regional parking garages, which is, what I've been looking at now. And I also question removing the fixed guideway, because I like the fixed guideway priority in terms of the CIS funding, and I think that's important. Those are just some impressions in my discussion about how, when I think through this, but I think those are things that are real that we would need to look at in the future.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Beth?
Okay, thanks so much. I just wanted to come back to a point that Secretary Gwynn made, which was, I think, a request for us to support the West Shore interchange and identify that as a priority moving forward. Our MPO has not yet made any comments about the CIS cost feasible plan. We wanted to wait and see what the results of the regional survey were. I'm proposing that we bring the CIS cost feasible plan and the comments back to our board at our next board meeting, and potentially send a letter about that, and have the opportunity then to identify the West Shore interchange as a high priority for us that we would like to see funding for as soon as possible. And I just wanted to put that out there to see if either of the other MPOs might be willing to take some kind of action in the next couple months.
We've already taken that action, thanks to Commissioner Eggers. Made a motion in our board in transmitting our priorities to DOT, said the State Road 60 I-275 interchange is the highest priority in the region.
Well, we made that decision at this board.
It's on the list.
Meeting before last, that we made it number one. It was the most important regional priority. So if we need to do it at our MPO, I'm sure Commissioner Kemp and I will get that taken care of.
Yeah, the more we can get to show solidarity that we can bring,
absolutely,
will be very helpful.
We'll do it.
well, I was just gonna ask Secretary, but thanks to Commissioner Eggers, we did that at our Fort Pinellas, but would you want a supported letter, or did we discuss having a supported letter back to you with that in?
We can consider that.
Yeah.
You want from the county commission or just the MPO?
If we could get both, would be great.
Okay.
It's really showing more that we have a broad consensus, and we can go and, I want to push the District 5 secretary out of the way when he brings his letters and say, we've got more here.
Okay. So, Commissioner Kemp, I'll let you take care of MPO, bring it up and BOCC next Wednesday.
Thank you.
We'll do the same in our MPO. Oh, Commissioner Long?
Absolutely. Yeah,
I'm
take
waiting
care
for
of
my
it. It's too
turn.
important. It's critical.
I'm sure we can get the commission to.
I've gotten stuck in it too many times. Okay. Any?
Yeah, Commissioner Long.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Long, then Commissioner Eggers. Sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll make my comments really brief. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the comments from Secretary Quinn, and I think the more often he can remind us of all of the great work that's in the pipeline, the better we are able to articulate exactly what we are doing for our citizens, because sometimes all we do is see road construction and people get really mad at us. But thank you. I just wanted to say thank you so much for those comments that you made. And secondly, the comments that Secretary Gwynn just made really need to be taken to heart by the policymakers sitting around this table, because it surely speaks to the fact that we have to take a really solid look at the revenue streams we already have and think about whether or not there are better, more efficient and effective ways to appropriate those dollars. I sound like a broken record because I keep thinking about and talking about other funding streams we're not currently using that, in my opinion, is almost irresponsible not to consider. And I've talked to Whit and my fellow commissioners about it, and I'm hopeful we can move forward on that front. And then lastly, I just want to say that the intermodal, and I have to find my little note that I have right here. So the intermodal systems or centers could make our current bus service, PSTA and HART, connections to the airport and the gateway much more efficient. And the interchange is important too, because we can discount intermodal centers. So it all works together. Thank you.
Okay.
I shouldn't have let you go first.
Write it down. I've been
Most of what I had, you talked about.
Great
Good.
minds
No,
think
I don't know.
Good, we
I don't
can
know.
move on.
I won't include myself in the great minds, but I do appreciate your comments. Thank you, Secretary, for keeping us sometimes
Very good.
focused. I really appreciate those comments. They're right on target. And I'm glad to hear that we're at least going to be coming forward with that recommendation from your MPO, I don't know if we can get it on, we can probably get it on our county commission to consider it for November, but certainly in December as a position.
I already made a note.
Okay,
For the new county administrator.
Okey-doke. So you'll take care of that one.
I absolutely will.
Okay, great.
Can't you guys just stick things on your agenda?
Yeah, we try to be.
We try to do that, but we try to be collaborative in how we do it, Commissioner Berman. So when we get to the dais, we're potentially all on the same page. Imagine that novel idea.
All right. I have actually, it's so funny that Commissioner Kemp at the last meeting talked about being an outlier, and I totally disagreed with you on that.
Yeah,
and I've agreed with you often today on many things. The first thing that has come up that I'm not sure I do agree, disagree with you on, is the whole concept and priority of the intermodals. And so I'd like to maybe perhaps at some point take another look at those and just kind of just revisit how they actually are going to be working in that new vision that we have for the area. Because I do think it seems to me that whether it's the first mile, last mile connection issues that we have on transit sometimes, but also on how we change from walking to cars that we have to have some place to bring everybody together, albeit a garage in some instances. I understand what your comment was. But I do think that it seems to me has a place, so I just want to make sure that we continue having that discussion, maybe revisit it. And the last comment I would make is just, and it really isn't necessarily dealing with SIDS, but this whole managed toll and paying toll lanes, I'd like to maybe look at that again, because it seems to have a bad name, and I'm not sure why. It seems that people who want to afford or can afford to take it, for whatever reason, takes people off the other lanes. So I'd like to understand that connection, because if people who can afford it get in an exclusive lane and free up the lanes for people who either choose not to afford it or can't, it seems like a win-win, where but I'd like to know more how that interconnectivity works, because it seems like if you're not going to deal with that, then you're not really dealing with congestion. So just have more conversation about that so we can move forward with that not necessarily having a bad name, or if it deserves it, keeping that name. So maybe some discussion about that.
And I think we can bring a couple folks in if you want for one of these meetings. Bring Ming and his consultant on the intermodal studies to come in and give you an update, and then you can ask them questions.
I think we should do that.
Okay.
I want to find out if CIS, what the requirements really are.
We can find out a little bit more on that. I want to say that it is eligible for CIS, but I want to also check it and make sure.
Yeah.
Because it connects, one of the things about the express lanes, and in Miami, what they've said is that it has really helped not just the express lanes, but it's improved traffic, like you're saying, on the non-express lanes. What they're finding is a lot of the folks that have a need to be somewhere at a certain time that want to get on it, use it, but on the other days they might not use it. So it has helped, but unfortunately the pricing, some people designate them Lexus lanes or other things because they think only people with a lot of money. But quite honestly, a lot of people who are on business, they talk about people that have, I think pest control people with one thing, is that if I can get to 8 homes a day instead of 6, I've just really increased the amount of money for me or for my company. And if I have to use a toll road or express lane to be able to do that, I'll pay that because it's worth it to me on my business. So there's lots of folks who get benefit of that, but it also, you're right, takes somebody out of the other lane.
I'd like to just hear that cause and effect, so, because sometimes we talk about taxing the rich more, right? I mean, there's that conversation out there, and this seems to be taxing people who, maybe it's on, or as you said, our bus system that can get onto that too, that takes people in a quicker way. But I think it really is, it can be a misnomer, because I think they're actually subsidizing or freeing up those other lanes for better movement of traffic. So I just want to make sure we have that conversation so we peg the right kind of name to it, regardless of what people may perceive it to be.
I can bring it to a presentation, either I'll give it or I'll see if I can get somebody from Miami to come up and give you an overview how it worked down there, which was
I would like, I think that would be good.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Kemp.
I would like that very much too, but I also would like a balanced presentation, because I feel like we don't, and I'm not specifically criticizing AFDA, but that we don't get two sides of this. And just to be clear, it's our general revenue that's paying for the lanes, that is creating the lane for benefit for people that can afford it. I would feel like it would be out of my affordability. So we could just as well add another lane for everyone to use instead of prioritizing for only those that could afford it. It's caused, all across the country, it has caused huge battles. Let me tell you,
I agree.
It's brought down people. It's brought down, it almost brought down a governor in Washington State from what they did. And they have limited how high they can do the toll lanes in Miami. I could talk a lot about where, in many instances, of how people feel very much it's not working, not clearing up traffic. Yeah.
I want to hear the conversation.
Right. No, I'm just trying to say that there are other sides to it. It's not just not a bad, you know, I just think there could be a more balanced presentation of the pros and cons and the issues that occur with it.
Yeah, there's obviously two different trains of thoughts on it, and they're...
Trains.
Yeah, well, not a train, though.
No, I'm just teasing.
I know. The challenge is that most people believe if you put in an extra lane or 2 lanes out there on the interstate, what you're going to have is 2 more congested lanes. And that, you know, as long as our growth in land use stuff continues like it is, and we get 1,000 people a day moving here and wanting to go around on the travel, if that would, so we couldn't really build enough lanes. It's the same argument for transit, I guess. You know, we got to start using other forms than just the road for getting people around. But on the other train of thought, the express lanes provide a reliable travel time alternative that you have to pay to use. That's what it is.
I will tell you, I use the express lanes on Veterans all the time. And because I know I can go 75 and you don't have to get mixed up in other traffic, slow down. But I will tell you the benefit. I have gotten on there and there's been accidents, and you are really bypassing all that traffic that's stuck in an accident. So there are some benefits to it. I see it, but it's my choice to do it also. Mr. Klug?
But just a couple of things. When it comes to SIS, the port, of course, all of our cargo is coming in by water. It's going out by road and rail. We prefer to have it go by rail. So just to be cognizant that if we take rail away for commuter rail, that's maybe putting more freight on the roads. Because in the future, we want to make sure we still have rail for freight. And we want to put that freight on rail versus the roads, because a lot of that truck traffic, a lot of the traffic on the roads is truck traffic on I-75 and 275, et cetera. Also, one of the things we sold to our truck drivers in the port, we have 10,000 truck moves a day on average, is the ability, when we did I-4 connector, was that it's going to increase your ability to go to Polk County and back. You can have several truck moves a day. It'll be more efficient for you. You'll be idling in Ybor City. You go on this I-4 connector where you pay a toll. It's a toll you're not paying before, but you have the ability to do more truck moves, like you were saying before, with the commercial vendors. So we just want to make sure that that's taken into account as well, as far as the number of truck moves that could benefit through some type of toll lanes.
Nobody wants more trucks on the road.
And just to comment on that, our surge pricing lanes or express lanes, whatever you want to call them, will not have, trucks can't use them, correct? So all the other people will be stuck with all the truck traffic. But the other thing is that the CSX lines that are for sale are because they're very low use. And in Orlando, they move the freight at night on those same rails. And the well-used ones from the port,
Yeah,
whatever,
nothing's
are not,
happening to
yeah,
those.
those are not even under consideration.
The ones are really low usage, like going through downtown, down to Ballast Point.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We're also trying to look at a way to free up the rail going down to Port Tampa.
Yeah.
Opportunity for commuter rail going down there.
Yeah.
If we can remove a couple of the users down there,
Right.
put them in some other properties.
Yeah, that's always the case. Okay, great conversation. Really good. Commissioner Starkey did not arrive, so we will take it up with you. Sorry, Whit. We'll take it up at the next meeting so we can have consensus. I do think she, because she has been vocal on it in the past, she will probably have some thoughts about it.
Commissioner Merman, may I interrupt? I just got a note from Commissioner Stark.
Okay.
She wants everyone to know that both Commissioners Starkey and Mariano want the even membership composition, 2 each or 3 each from each MPO. They asked that we relay that message, and she also had indicated that that's kind of sort of the way Tampa Bay Water operates, which seems to be working pretty effectively thus far. Just FYI, thank you.
I will make this comment back because Pasco has struggled to even have one commissioner here at our TMA meetings. I'm going to be honest, we can check. the attendance, but I do know, because I attend every meeting, and have, all along, and I think that
I hear you, I'm just,
you're the messenger.
don't shoot the messenger, I'm just conveying.
But I do, you know, if you want to relay that, I mean, the commitment's got to be there. We're not going to agree to numbers that are unrealistic, 3, 3, and 3, and they can't even get 1. So, you know, that's not going to work. So, it is what it is. You know, we have to look at the facts too. I certainly want Pasco to have a good representation here. We all do. They're a growing community. And no one's saying, but I just think that they got to realize this is an important group.
And not to be, please don't take this the wrong way, but maybe that's an issue we should have a conversation about one day, because the group as a whole has, there are comments made in the community. People don't understand why we're meeting and what we're for, because we're not authorized by statute. We don't have any regulatory authority. We don't necessarily have any money. So it's a volunteer thing. So if you are an elected official and you have several different commitments and it all conflicts at the same time frame, I think there's a tendency to dismiss it because, oh, well, what does it matter? It doesn't really matter anyway. And that's a reality as well.
Yeah, it is. It is. And they only have 5 commissioners.
Well, you know, so you get, I mean, it's a problem.
Yeah, Pinellas has 7, Hillsborough 7.
How many, Hillsborough has 7 as well, correct?
Okay, we'll discuss it at the next meeting. Yes.
I just had an update. I wanted to let everybody know that next week, the Fort Pinellas Board and the PSTA Board are sending a joint group of folks to Indianapolis on a fact-finding mission to go look at their emerging bus rapid transit system, as well as a few other things. Indianapolis, their legislature authorized them to pass an income tax. We can't do that here in Florida, but for 6 counties,
income tax there.
6 counties in central Indiana to build a bus rapid transit network.
Wow.
It's under construction. So we have the Indianapolis MPO. They did a great campaign. The chamber led the charge for the raising of that tax. So Brad and Cassandra are going to be joining us, along with Commissioner Long and several of our board members. Commissioner Vice Mayor Claudel, sorry, yes. And I think we're going to have a really good couple of 3 days. So we'd be glad to share those findings with you all back at our February meeting.
Great city, born and raised there.
Okay.
I think it's been one of the most progressive cities in the United States. They have the loop, you know, around the city, which has been very good for them.
And the cultural trail as well.
Commissioner Eggers?
Yeah, just following up on that conversation about Pasco. I have a great deal of respect for them, as well as I do Hillsborough County Commissioners. I do think the conversation to have about attendance at these regional meetings is important, because sometimes, I'm sure it won't be the first time that they don't have enough people, but I can tell you there's been some meetings where Hillsborough County folks didn't show up at meetings, and I'm sure there's been some where Pinellas County folks didn't show up at meetings. So I think the conversation about the commitment to regional discussion is really important, and that doesn't mean that it supersedes our local stuff. I mean, we all know our local stuff is where it happens, but this connectivity thing and having, you know, us at the table together is really important. So I don't want to single them out alone. Maybe for this group, you know, it might be a little different story. The other thing I just wanted to consider, and I'm not bringing it up for discussion now, but we're having all this conversation about forming our group and discussing us going forward, and duplicity of efforts and confusion to the public and all of that. This group represents MPOs, and so again, Tampa Bay Transportation Management Area Leadership Group doesn't say anything about MPOs. So and again, I'm not trying to oversimplify, but why aren't we just Tampa Bay MPO Leadership Group? Because I think as we go forward, I think we need to make sure that we are less confusing, we're talking about the role that we have with connection with TBARTA and what the differences are going to be and the similarities, but we're also talking about our residents, and I think there's a little bit of confusion with what TMA is and what relationship. Oh, it's a group of MPOs. Oh, well, then you're a MPO leadership group. So just not for today, but maybe we can talk about that as we move this group forward.
Well, I've never liked the word group. Group is, we all have groups, and it's a less formal, and we are more of a council. Maybe it's Transportation Management Regional Council, kind of like maybe in South Florida, but anyway.
You've given us the charge to come up with a slogan and.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And I want to weigh in, and I agree that Commissioner Eggers, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
What I'd like to weigh in on is I'd like to remind everybody that, and it was prior to Secretary Gwynn, but I know that Secretary Gwynn also endorsed this via Secretary Paul Steinman at the time, but Commissioner Merman and I think, were the originals back in the day in 2012. And this is a very important group. So those of us that are representing the region, when we do hear things in our community, I think we need to clarify for our communities that this board, be it that it doesn't have maybe legislative powers, it is a very, very strong board or council, however you want to choose, that actually has helped us at least get our communication regionally. Commissioner Merman, I'm sure, will say that I'm going to share a story back in those days when we were approached by CSX for that line. We spent a couple meetings just talking about the name of that line. It happened to be Clearwater. And in the future, if we get ourselves wrapped around developing that line, it probably will become Tampa Bay, CSX, or whatever the name will be. My point actually bringing that up is that it's important to the communities to know that this is a council of regional effort, in which I think is very informative. Many of the folks that are here today have been here and have been with us the whole time. So I just want that clarification for the record.
Just to respond to Vice Mayor Caudell, although this group does not have standing in statute explicitly, our previous regional coordination mechanism, the MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee, which does still exist in statute, does, and that group also has the authority to set priorities for the Transportation Regional Incentive Program based on the interlocal agreement that we have for that. And I think based on the conversation that we've had here this morning, I think we're at a point where we should come back with some options about how to kind of rationalize our decision-making process. And are there changes that need to be made to statute? Are there changes that need to be made to interlocal agreement? So that we're not all going in a bunch of different directions.
That's exactly right.
I agree.
That's much better. You said that much better than I was trying. So thank you.
Okay. I think we've concluded our business, and we are adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
No, we're going show up for practice.
Well, you need help cleaning up? Yeah, we're all set.
Talk to him.